The grand clock in the hallway struck 6, and Arthur Kowalski pushed his cleaning cart through the heavy oak doors of the Whitmore Academy of Music. The wheels squeaked softly against the polished marble floor, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat after 12 years of evening shifts. At 54, Arthur had developed a routine so precise that he could navigate the building with his eyes closed. The academy was a different world after the students left. During the day, it buzzed with young voices, scales racing up and down from practice rooms and the occasional frustrated bang of hands on piano keys. But in the evening, it belonged to Arthur and the ghosts of melodies that seemed to linger in the air like expensive perfume. He started with the smaller practice rooms on the first floor, methodically emptying wastebaskets and wiping down doorknobs. Each room had its own personality. Room 101 always smelled like peppermint because the violin student who used it in the afternoons had a habit of leaving candy wrappers behind. Room 103 had a stubborn window that wouldn't close properly, letting in the sounds of the city below. Arthur worked quietly, efficiently. His hands, rough from years of manual labor, moved with practiced ease. Nobody paid attention to janitors, he had learned long ago. They were invisible, necessary but unnoticed, like the air conditioning that kept the building cool or the electricity that powered the lights. The Whitmore Academy wasn't just any music school. It was the kind of place where parents paid $50,000 a year for their children to learn from the best teachers in the country. The walls were lined with photographs of famous musicians who had studied there, their faces frozen in confident smiles. The building itself was over 100 years old, with high ceilings that made even whispers echo, and windows so tall that cleaning them required special equipment. As Arthur made his way to the second floor, he passed the trophy cases filled with competition awards and newspaper clippings. One headline caught his eye, as it did every night. Whitmore prodigy Celeste wins National Youth Piano Competition. The photo showed a young woman with perfectly styled dark hair and piercing blue eyes, her fingers poised above piano keys like a surgeon holding a scalpel. Celeste Whitmore. Everyone at the academy knew her name. She was 18, beautiful in that untouchable way that money and privilege often created, and talented enough that even the harshest critics couldn't find fault with her technique. She was also the granddaughter of Eleanor Whitmore, who had founded the academy 40 years ago and still ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Arthur had seen Celeste many times, always from a distance. She practiced in the main recital hall every afternoon from 3 to 6, never a minute less, never a minute more. He had learned to time his cleaning schedule around her practice sessions, partly out of respect for her concentration, but mostly because he knew his place in the academy's hierarchy. The third floor housed the administrative offices and the smaller recital rooms, but the jewel of the building was on the fourth floor, the main recital hall. Arthur saved it for last each night, not because it was the most difficult to clean, but because being alone in that space felt like standing in a cathedral. Tonight, as he pushed open the heavy doors, the last rays of sunset were streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden stripes across the rows of red velvet seats. The room could hold 300 people, though it was only filled to capacity during special performances and graduations. At the center of the stage, bathed in the dying light, sat the piano. It wasn't just any piano. It was a Steinway Model D, 9 feet of gleaming black perfection that cost more than most people's houses. The Academy's insurance policy valued it at $250,000, though Arthur had heard some of the teachers say it was priceless. Only certain students were allowed to play it, and they had to sign a special form accepting responsibility for any damage. Arthur approached the stage slowly, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He had cleaned around this piano hundreds of times, careful never to touch it with anything more than a specialized microfiber cloth for the outside. The keys were cleaned only by a technician who came once a month with special solutions and tools. As he set down his supplies and began sweeping the stage, something caught his eye. There on the piano bench was a stack of sheet music. Arthur recognized the elegant handwriting on the margins immediately. Celeste had been practicing here this afternoon and had forgotten her music. He stood there for a moment, uncertain. The sheet music was expensive, He could tell from the quality of the paper and the professional binding. It was Chopin's Ballade, number 1 in G minor, with personal notes written in pencil throughout. She would probably need it for tomorrow's practice. Arthur looked around the empty hall. He could leave it there, but what if someone else moved it? What if it fell and got damaged? He made a decision. Carefully, he approached the piano bench, intending to simply move the music to a safer spot on the closed piano lid. As he reached for the sheets, his sleeve caught on the edge of the bench, pulling him slightly off balance. His hand came down on the piano keys to steady himself, and a soft chord rang out in the empty hall. The sound seemed to hang in the air for an eternity, beautiful and forbidden at the same time. Arthur jerked his hand back as if the keys were hot. His heart was racing. He grabbed the sheet music, placed it carefully on top of the piano, and quickly returned to his cleaning. But the ghost of that chord followed him as he worked, a reminder of a boundary crossed, however accidentally. He finished cleaning the hall in record time, eager to leave the scene of his mishap. As he was gathering his supplies, he noticed something he had missed before. In the corner of the stage, partially hidden behind a music stand, was a small security camera. Its red light blinked steadily, recording everything. Arthur's stomach dropped. He told himself it would be fine. Surely they would understand it was an accident. He was just trying to protect the sheet music. But as he wheeled his cart out of the recital hall and down the long corridor, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The academy had rules, both written and unwritten. The written rules were in his employment contract. Arrive on time, complete all assigned areas, report any damages or issues. The unwritten rules were simpler but more absolute. Know your place, stay invisible, don't touch what doesn't belong to you. As Arthur loaded his supplies into the janitor's closet and prepared to leave for the night, he thought about those unwritten rules. He thought about the photographs on the walls, the trophy cases, the expensive instruments carefully maintained for talented students. He thought about Celeste Whitmore and her 3-hour practice sessions, her perfect posture and perfect technique. And for just a moment, as he stood in the darkened hallway with his hand on the light switch, Arthur allowed himself to remember what that chord had felt like under his fingers. The smooth ivory, cool to the touch. The way the key had yielded to the slightest pressure. The pure, clear sound that had filled the empty hall. Then he turned off the light and walked out into the night, unaware that the small red eye of the security camera had captured everything, and that tomorrow would bring consequences he couldn't imagine. Arthur arrived at work the next evening 15 minutes early, as he always did. The autumn air was crisp, and he pulled his jacket tighter as he walked through the employee entrance at the back of the building. Something felt different the moment he stepped inside. The security guard, usually friendly and chatty, barely looked up from his newspaper. In the break room, Arthur hung up his jacket and put on his work uniform, a gray shirt with Whitmore Academy maintenance embroidered on the pocket. He was reaching for his time card when Robert, the maintenance supervisor, appeared in the doorway. "Arthur," Robert said, his face unreadable. "Mrs. Whitmore wants to see you in her office. Now." Arthur's mouth went dry. In 12 years, he had never been called to the director's office. Eleanor Whitmore ran the academy like a small kingdom, and janitors didn't get audiences with the queen. "Is everything okay?" Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. Robert shrugged, but his eyes were sympathetic. "Just go. 4th floor, end of the hall." The walk to Mrs. Whitmore's office felt like walking to his own execution. Arthur's work boots seemed to echo too loudly in the hallway. Students were still in the building, packing up their instruments and chatting in small groups. A few glanced at him curiously as he passed. He never came to this part of the building during regular hours. The director's office had a heavy wooden door with a brass nameplate. Arthur knocked softly. "Enter," came a sharp voice from inside. The office was exactly what Arthur had imagined. Dark wood paneling, shelves lined with books about music theory and history, and a massive desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. Behind the desk sat Eleanor Whitmore, 73 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that could freeze water. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was Celeste, still in her practice clothes. a black dress that probably cost more than Arthur made in a month. Her arms were crossed and her beautiful face was twisted with anger. In the corner stood a man in a dark suit who Arthur recognized as the Academy's head of security. "Mr. Kowalski," Mrs. Whitmore began, her voice like ice cracking. "Do you know why you're here?" Arthur's throat felt like sandpaper. "I think so, ma'am." "You think so?" Celeste's voice cut through the air. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "You touched my piano. You, a janitor, put your filthy hands on a Steinway Model D. Do you have any idea what that instrument is worth?" "I'm sorry," Arthur said quietly. "It was an accident. I was trying to move your sheet music to a safe place. You had left it on the bench, and I was worried it might fall or get damaged. So you decided to damage something worth $250,000 instead?" Celeste's voice was rising. "That piano is maintained by specialists. It's cleaned with specific products. Your hands could have left oils, dirt, who knows what else on those keys." Mrs. Whitmore raised a hand and Celeste fell silent, though her eyes still blazed with fury. "Mr. Kowalski," the older woman said, "we have very strict policies about our instruments. You've been here long enough to know them. The security footage clearly shows you touching the piano keys." "It was just for a second," Arthur said. "My sleeve caught on the bench. I lost my balance." "That's not what it looked like to me," Celeste snapped. "It looked like you were trying to play it, like you thought you had the right to touch something that doesn't belong to you." The words stung more than Arthur expected. He looked down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of work. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had wanted to touch it, just for a moment, to feel what it was like. "I've been here 12 years, Arthur said softly. "I've never had a single complaint. I've never taken anything, never damaged anything. I've been a good employee." "Until now," Mrs. Whitmore said. She opened a folder on her desk. "The piano will need to be professionally cleaned and inspected. That's a $500 expense. It will come out of your final paycheck." "Final paycheck?" Arthur's head snapped up. "You're being terminated effective immediately," Mrs. Whitmore said as casually as if she were discussing the weather. "We cannot have employees who don't respect boundaries. The instruments here are not toys. They are tools for serious musicians, for artists, not for—" She paused, looking at his uniform. "Maintenance staff." Arthur felt something crack inside his chest. "Mrs. Whitmore, please. I need this job. My daughter, she's in her 3rd year of college. I'm paying her tuition. I can't lose this income." For a moment, he thought he saw something flicker in the older woman's eyes. But Celeste spoke first. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you touched my piano," she said. "Do you know how hard I work? How many hours I practice? That instrument is sacred to me. It's not just about the money, it's about respect. You're just a janitor. You clean floors and empty trash. You don't get to pretend you're something you're not." The words hung in the air like a slap. Arthur looked at this young woman, barely out of high school, who had never worked a day in her life for anything that wasn't handed to her. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but what was the point? She was right about one thing. He was just a janitor. "I'll need your keys and your access card," the security man said, speaking for the first time. With shaking hands, Arthur removed his key ring and his employee card. 12 years, ended with a few pieces of metal and plastic, handed over in silence. "You can collect your personal belongings from your locker," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck, minus the cleaning costs, will be mailed to you." Arthur nodded. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Miss Whitmore," he said to Celeste, "your Chopin needs work. The second movement measures 43 through 47. Your tempo is rushing. It makes the whole piece feel anxious instead of passionate." Celeste's face went red. "How dare you?" But Arthur was already walking out, the security guard close behind him. The trip to his locker was a blur. He grabbed his jacket, a coffee mug his daughter had given him that said "World's Best Dad," and a small photo he kept taped inside the door. The security guard watched him like he might steal something. As they walked toward the exit, they passed the main recital hall. The doors were open, and Arthur could see the piano on stage gleaming under the lights. For 12 years he had cleaned around it, admired it from afar, treated it with the reverence it deserved. One accidental touch, 1 second of contact, and his life was turned upside down. Outside, the security guard held the door open. "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "I saw the footage. It really did look like an accident." Arthur nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He walked down the steps and into the night, unemployed for the first time in 30 years. Behind him, the academy glowed with warm light, filled with music and possibility and dreams. But those dreams weren't for people like him. They never had been. As he walked to the bus stop, Arthur thought about Celeste's words. "You're just a janitor." She was right, of course, that's all he was to them. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that sometimes being invisible meant you could see things others couldn't. And sometimes the people who seemed the smallest had the biggest secrets. He pulled out his phone to call his daughter to tell her he'd lost his job. But as he stood there in the cold, he found himself thinking about measures 43 through 47 of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. He was right about the tempo. He knew he was right. The question was, how did a janitor know that? 2 weeks had passed since Arthur lost his job. He'd spent the days sending out resumes, attending interviews at office buildings and shopping centers, trying to smile when managers half his age told him he was overqualified for janitorial work or underqualified for anything else. His daughter, Lily, had offered to take a semester off from college to work, but Arthur wouldn't hear of it. She was so close to graduating, so close to becoming the engineer she'd dreamed of being since she was 10 years old. On a rainy Thursday night, Arthur's phone rang. It was Robert, his old supervisor. "Arthur, I'm sorry to bother you," Robert said, sounding stressed. "But we have an emergency. A pipe burst in the basement and it's flooding. The new guy doesn't know the building like you do. I know you don't work here anymore, but could you come help? Just for tonight. I'll pay you cash off the books." Arthur hesitated. Going back to the academy felt like returning to the scene of a crime, but Robert had always been kind to him and he needed the money. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said. The academy looked different at midnight. Without the usual evening lights, it felt abandoned, almost haunted. Arthur met Robert at the back entrance and they spent 3 hours working in the basement, shutting off water valves, setting up pumps, moving boxes of sheet music and supplies to dry ground. It was hard, messy work, but Arthur knew every pipe, every valve, every corner of that basement. By 3 in the morning, they had the situation under control. Robert, exhausted and covered in mud, handed Arthur $300 in cash. "I'm sorry about what happened," Robert said. "It wasn't right. You're a good man, Arthur." "Thanks," Arthur said. "I should go." But as he walked through the building one last time, his feet took him on a familiar path. Up the stairs, past the practice rooms, past the trophy cases, to the 4th floor. He told himself he just wanted to see it once more. The recital hall. The doors were unlocked, probably forgotten in the chaos of the flood. Arthur pushed them open and stepped inside. The room was completely dark except for a shaft of moonlight falling directly on the piano, as if a spotlight had been arranged by the universe itself. Arthur stood there for a long moment, his wet shoes leaving prints on the carpet. He should leave. He was trespassing now. If anyone found him here, he could be arrested, but the piano seemed to call to him. Not the expensive Steinway, but the music inside it, waiting to be released. Arthur had stayed away from pianos for so long, had buried that part of himself so deep that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to need to play. But standing here in this empty hall with no one to see or judge, the need overwhelmed him. He walked to the stage slowly, each step a decision he couldn't take back. He sat on the bench, the same bench where he'd accidentally touched the keys 2 weeks ago. But this time he placed both hands deliberately on the keys. The first notes were tentative, scales to warm up fingers that hadn't played in years. But Muscle memory is a powerful thing. Within minutes, his hands remembered their old paths, their old strength. And then, without really deciding to, Arthur began to play. It was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece that had once defined him. The opening chords filled the empty hall with a sound so rich and full it seemed impossible it came from just one person. His hands flew across the keys with a precision that belonged to concert halls and recording studios, not to a fired janitor sitting in the dark. As he played, Arthur's eyes closed, and he was 23 again, on stage at Warsaw's National Philharmonic Hall. He could feel the hot stage lights, hear the orchestra behind him, sense the audience holding its breath. The music poured out of him like water breaking through a dam, years of suppressed passion and pain transformed into sound. He moved into the second movement, the one that always made him think of his wife, Helena, who had died 10 years ago. She was the only one who knew his secret, who knew why he had stopped playing, why they had left Poland and started over in America with nothing. Even Lily didn't know. He had wanted to protect her from the weight of his past. So lost was he in the music that Arthur didn't hear the door open. He didn't see the figure standing frozen in the doorway. Didn't notice when she stepped inside and sank into a seat in the back row. Celeste had come back for her metronome, forgotten in her rush to leave earlier. She'd been battling insomnia lately, the pressure of upcoming auditions keeping her awake. When she'd remembered the metronome at 2 in the morning, she'd decided to drive over and get it. The flooding situation had left the building accessible. But what she found in the recital hall stopped her cold. The janitor, the man she had gotten fired, the man she had called nobody, was playing her piano. But more than that, he was playing it like she had never heard anyone play before. Not her teachers, not the guest artists who performed at the academy, not even the recordings of the great masters she studied religiously. This was different. This was someone who didn't just understand the notes but lived inside them. Each phrase was a conversation. Each pause was deliberate and meaningful. The technical difficulty of what he was playing, passages that would challenge any professional pianist, seemed effortless under his fingers. Celeste found herself crying and didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he played the third movement, with a joy that was somehow also heartbreaking. Maybe it was the realization that she had been wrong about everything. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in her life, she was hearing what music was supposed to sound like when it came from the soul instead of from hours of rehearsal and technique. Arthur finished the concerto and sat in silence, his hands still on the keys. The last note seemed to hang in the air, reluctant to fade. He opened his eyes and saw his reflection in the polished black surface of the piano. A middle-aged man in muddy work clothes, sitting where he didn't belong, playing music no one would believe he could play. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the piano. "I just needed to say goodbye." He stood up, carefully closed the key cover, and wiped his fingerprints from the surface with his sleeve. As he turned to leave, he heard a sound from the back of the hall. A single person clapping, slowly. His blood turned to ice. He looked up, squinting into the darkness, and saw her. Celeste Whitmore, standing in the aisle, tears streaming down her face, clapping as if her life depended on it. "Please," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "I can explain. I was helping with the flood. I just wanted to see the hall once more. I'll leave. Please don't call the police." Celeste walked down the aisle slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. When she reached the stage, she looked up at him, and Arthur saw something in her expression he'd never seen before. Not anger, not disgust, but wonder. "Who are you?" she whispered. Arthur looked away. "No one, just a janitor who shouldn't be here." "No," Celeste said, her voice stronger now. "Janitors don't play Rachmaninoff like that. Janitors don't know that. My tempo was wrong in Chopin. Who are you really?" Arthur was quiet for so long that Celeste thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said, "I used to be someone else, a long time ago." "Will you tell me?" she asked. Arthur looked at this young woman who had destroyed his life 2 weeks ago, who had called him nothing, who represented everything he had learned to resent about privilege and entitlement. But in her eyes now, he saw something else. Hunger. Not for fame or success, but for understanding. For truth. It's a long story, he said. Celeste sat down on the stage steps. I have time. Arthur sat down on the edge of the stage, his legs suddenly feeling too weak to hold him. Celeste waited, giving him time to find the words. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of rain against the windows. My real name is Artur Kowalczyk, he finally said, pronouncing it the Polish way. I changed it when I came to America. Made it easier to pronounce, easier to blend in. Celeste moved closer, sitting just a few feet away from him on the stage steps. You're Polish? From Krakow, Arthur nodded. My mother was a music teacher. She started teaching me piano when I was 4 years old. She used to say I was born with music in my fingers. He looked down at his hands, rough and worn now, so different from what they once were. I was what they called a prodigy, he continued. By the time I was 8, I was performing with orchestras. By 15, I was touring Europe. My parents gave up everything for my career. My father worked 3 jobs to pay for my lessons with the best teachers. My mother spent every moment she wasn't teaching other students working with me. What happened? Celeste asked softly. Arthur was quiet for a moment, lost in memories. When I was 21, I won the International Chopin Piano Competition in Warsaw. Do you know what that means? Celeste's eyes widened. That's one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world. They only hold it every 5 years. Yes, Arthur said. Winning it changed everything. Suddenly I had recording contracts, concert bookings all over the world. I was going to play at Carnegie Hall, the Sydney Opera House, all the great venues. My parents were so proud. My mother cried for 3 days straight after I won. He smiled at the memory, but it was a sad smile. I met my wife, Helena, at a celebration party in Warsaw. She was a violinist with the National Symphony. We fell in. Love fast the way young people do when the whole world seems to be opening up before them. We got married a year later. Our daughter Lily was born the year after that. Arthur stood up and walked to the piano, running his hand along its surface but not touching the keys. For 3 years, everything was perfect. I was playing sold-out concerts, recording albums, making more money than my parents had seen in their lifetime. Helena traveled with me when she could, and when she couldn't, I would rush home between concerts to be with her and Lily. I thought I had everything. And then? Celeste prompted gently. And then I got cocky. Arthur said, his voice bitter. I was 25 on top of the world, and I thought I was invincible. I was driving home from a concert in Berlin late at night. It had been a triumph, 3 encores, standing ovation. I should have stayed overnight, but I wanted to get home, to Helena and Lily. He paused, and Celeste could see his hands trembling slightly. I was going too fast on a wet road. The car skidded, hit a barrier, flipped 3 times. I was lucky to survive, the doctor said. But my right hand... He held up his hand, and for the first time, Celeste noticed the scars running along his palm and fingers. 7 fractures, 4 surgeries. The doctors did their best, but the damage to the nerves and tendons was severe. But you can still play, Celeste said. I just heard you. You're incredible. Arthur shook his head. I can play, yes, but not like before. The strength isn't there anymore. The precision in the fastest passages. I can't play for 2 hours straight without pain. After the accident, I tried to come back. I practiced for months working through the pain, trying to rebuild. But at my first concert after the accident in Vienna, my hand cramped during Liszt's La Campanella. I had to stop mid-performance and walk off stage. Celeste felt her heart breaking for him. She knew what that meant for a professional musician. It was career death. The critics were brutal, Arthur continued. One wrote that it was painful to watch a former champion reduced to an amateur. My manager canceled the rest of my tour. The recording label dropped me. In 6 months, I went from being Poland's pride to being a cautionary tale. That's not fair, Celeste said, anger flashing in her eyes. You were injured. It wasn't your fault. Arthur smiled sadly. The music world isn't about fair. It's about perfection. You know that. Celeste did know. She'd been raised in that world. where a single bad performance could end opportunities, where there was always someone younger and better waiting to take your place. We came to America when Lily was 5, Arthur said. I had some money saved, enough to start over. Helena found work teaching violin at a community center. I tried teaching too, but every time I sat at a piano with a student, it reminded me of what I'd lost. Eventually, I just stopped trying. And you became a janitor, Celeste said, understanding beginning to dawn on her face. I needed work that had nothing to do with music, Arthur said. Something where no one would know who I used to be. The academy was hiring. It seemed like cosmic irony at the time, cleaning the place where future musicians learned to fly while I could barely remember how to walk. But it was steady work, good benefits. Helena was diagnosed with cancer when Lily was 8. The medical bills were overwhelming. The academy's insurance helped, but it wasn't enough. Helena died when Lily was 10. Celeste felt tears running down her face. I'm so sorry. I had to keep going for Lily, Arthur said. She's brilliant, you know. Nothing like me. She's studying. Engineering, wants to build bridges. Real ones, not metaphorical ones. She doesn't even know about my past. I told her I played a little piano when I was young, nothing more. I didn't want her to carry the weight of what I'd lost. But why? Celeste asked. Why hide it? Arthur turned to face her. Because what's the point? I'm not that person anymore. Artur Kowalczyk, the pianist, died on that road in Germany. I'm just Arthur Kowalski now, a single father trying to put his daughter through college. No, Celeste said firmly, standing up. You're wrong. The music is still in you. I heard it. What you played tonight. It was more beautiful than anything I've ever heard. You have something that can't be taught. Something that most of us spend our whole lives trying to find. It doesn't matter anymore, Arthur said. It does matter. Celeste was almost shouting now. Do you know what I would give to play with half the feeling you have? I've been playing since I was 5, the best teachers, the best instruments, every opportunity in the world. But I've never made anyone feel what you made me feel tonight. When you played, I understood for the first time what music is really supposed to be. She walked up to him, close enough that he could see the determination in her eyes. I was horrible to you, she said. Cruel and arrogant and wrong about everything. You're not just a janitor. You're an artist, a true artist. And She paused, her voice breaking. I'm just a girl who plays the notes correctly. Arthur looked at her. This young woman who 2 weeks ago had cost him his job and saw something he hadn't expected. Humility. Hunger to learn. The same look he'd once had when he was young and desperate to understand music's deepest secrets. You could be more than that, he said quietly. You have the technique. You just need to find your soul in the music. Teach me, Celeste said, suddenly. Please, teach me how to play like you do. Arthur laughed, but it wasn't unkind. You want the janitor you had fired to teach you? I want Artur Kowalczyk, winner of the International Chopin competition, to teach me, she said. I'll pay you. I'll pay you double what you are making here. Your grandmother would never allow it. Then we won't tell her, Celeste said. Please, I need to learn what you know. Not the technique, but the heart of it, the truth of it. Arthur looked at her for a long moment. Teaching again would mean facing everything he'd run from. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. 3 months had passed since that night in the recital hall. 3 months of secret lessons that changed everything. They met twice a week in Celeste's apartment, where she had a beautiful Yamaha grand piano. At first, Arthur was nervous, his hands shaking as he tried to demonstrate a passage. It had been so long since he'd taught anyone, and even longer since he'd played regularly. But Celeste was patient, eager to learn not just the notes, but the stories behind them. Don't think about impressing anyone, Arthur told her during their first lesson. The audience, the judges, your grandmother, forget them all. When you play, you're having a conversation. Sometimes with the composer, sometimes with yourself, sometimes with God. But it has to be honest. He taught her things no other teacher had mentioned. How Chopin wrote his nocturnes late at night when he couldn't sleep, coughing from the tuberculosis that would kill him. How Beethoven, completely deaf, had to feel the vibrations through the piano to know what he was composing. How every piece of music came from a real person with real pain, real joy, real life. Slowly, Celeste's playing began to change. The technical perfection was still there, but now there was something more. She learned to pause not where the music said to pause, but where her heart needed a moment. She learned that sometimes playing softer said more than playing louder. She learned that mistakes made with feeling were better than perfection without soul. Arthur discovered that teaching her was healing something in him too. Every lesson forced him to sit at the piano, to demonstrate, to play. His hand still hurt after long sessions, but he was building strength he thought was gone forever. More importantly, he was remembering why he had loved music in the first place, before the competitions and contracts and critics. Celeste paid him well, insisting on it despite his protests. For the first time in years, Arthur wasn't worried about money. He could even put some aside for Lily's final year of college. But more than the money, he had found purpose again. Then came the announcement that changed everything. "The annual gala is in 2 weeks," Celeste told him one evening after their lesson. "I'm supposed to perform. It's a big deal, all the academies, donors, board members, important people from the music world. Talent scouts, too. My grandmother expects me to announce which conservatory I'll be attending." "You'll do wonderfully," Arthur said, packing up his things. "I want to play the Chopin ballad," Celeste said. "The one I was working on when everything happened." Arthur nodded. They had been working on it together, transforming it from a technical showcase into a story of longing and triumph. "There's something else," Celeste said, her voice strange. "I want you to come." Arthur laughed. "I don't think your grandmother would appreciate seeing her former janitor at the gala." "Not as a janitor," Celeste said. "As my teacher." "As who you really are." "No," Arthur said immediately. "That's not possible." But Celeste had that look in her eyes, the same determination that made her practice the same passage 50 times until it was perfect. The night of the gala arrived faster than either of them expected. The academy was transformed, with white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and flowers everywhere. The city's elite filed in wearing designer gowns and custom suits, air-kissing and networking over champagne. Arthur stood outside in the parking lot, wearing the only suit he owned, a black one he'd bought for Helena's funeral. Celeste had begged him to come, had even put his name on the guest list, but standing there, he couldn't make himself go in. This wasn't his world anymore. Inside, Celeste was preparing backstage, her hands unusually steady. She wore a deep blue gown that her grandmother had chosen, her hair swept up elegantly. Other students were performing too, but everyone knew Celeste's performance was the highlight. She was the Academy star, the one expected to carry on the Whitmore legacy. 5 minutes, Miss Whitmore," the stage manager called. Celeste peeked through the curtain at the packed recital hall. Her grandmother sat in the front row, surrounded by board members. The piano gleamed under the spotlight, waiting. She walked onto the stage to warm applause. As she sat at the piano, she looked toward the back of the hall, hoping to see Arthur. But he wasn't there. She was alone. Taking a deep breath, she began to play. From the first notes, the audience knew something was different. This wasn't the technically perfect but cold Celeste they were used to. This was music that breathed, that lived, that told a story. She played the Chopin ballade like it was her own memory, each phrase revealing something personal and true. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Some were crying without knowing why. Even Eleanor Whitmore, who never showed emotion, was gripping her program tightly. When the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the applause exploded, everyone on their feet. Celeste stood and bowed, but she wasn't finished. She walked to the microphone, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said. "That performance was only possible because of my teacher." Eleanor looked pleased, probably assuming she meant one of the Academy's prestigious instructors. 12 weeks ago, Celeste continued, I did something terrible. I had a man fired for accidentally touching this piano. I said cruel things to him about knowing his place, about being just a janitor. I was wrong about everything. The room grew quiet, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. That man, Arthur Kowalski, is actually Artur Kowalczyk. In 1998, he won the International Chopin Piano Competition in Warsaw. He was one of the greatest pianists of his generation until a car accident damaged his hand and ended his career. He came to America and worked here as a janitor for 12 years, never telling anyone who he really was. Gasps echoed through the hall. Eleanor Whitmore's face had gone pale. 3 months ago, I discovered him playing in this very hall, Celeste continued. What I heard changed my life. He agreed to teach me, not technique, but how to find the soul in music. Everything beautiful in what you just heard came from him. She looked toward the doors. Mr. Kowalczyk, I know you're here somewhere. Please, show them what real music sounds like. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened, and Arthur walked in. His steps were slow but steady as he walked down the aisle, every eye in the room on him. Play the Rachmaninoff, Celeste said softly when he reached the stage. Please. Arthur looked at the sea of faces, all these people who had ignored him for years, who had looked through him like he was invisible. Then he looked at Celeste, this young woman who had somehow given him back a piece of himself he thought was lost forever. He sat at the piano, the bench familiar now after all these months. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The opening of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto filled the hall with such power and beauty that several people gasped. Arthur played like he was 25 again, like his hand had never been broken, like the years of silence had been storing up music that now poured out in an unstoppable flood. He played with technique that most pianists could only dream of, but more than that, he played with the weight of everything he'd lost and found again. The music told the story of a man who had fallen from the heights, who had learned to find dignity in being invisible, who had discovered that sometimes the greatest teachers are the ones who have known failure. When he finished, the silence lasted, even longer than it had for Celeste. Then someone in the back started clapping slowly. Others joined. Soon the entire room was on its feet, applauding with an intensity that shook the windows. Arthur stood and bowed, tears streaming down his face. He looked at Celeste, who was crying too, and pulled her into a hug. Thank you, he whispered, for making me remember who I am. Eleanor Whitmore was the last to stand, the last to clap, but when she did, she walked onto the stage. Mr. Kowalczyk, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. I owe you an apology and an offer. Would you consider joining our faculty as our artist in residence? The room held its breath. Arthur looked at Eleanor, then at Celeste, then out at the audience full of people who finally saw him. I would be honored, he said. 6 months later, Arthur stood in the same recital hall, but this time as a teacher, watching his students perform. Celeste had won a full scholarship to Juilliard, but she still called him every week, telling him about what she was learning, asking for advice. Lily had finally learned the truth about her father. She had cried, then hugged him, then made him promise to teach her to play. Now she was in the audience watching her father take the stage for his first official concert in 20 years. As Arthur placed his hands on the keys, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. Sometimes, he realized, you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. And sometimes the person who breaks you is the same person who helps you heal. He began to play, and the music told the whole story better than words ever could.